With a mocking smile, he emphasized that he had no interest in killing the herald simply because he devoured the weak or betrayed others. The real reason, he said coldly, was that he despised his weakness, his pathetic dream of becoming strong by feeding on others. In the end, the phoenix reminded him contemptuously of his origin. Once upon a time he had been nothing more than an insignificant third-rank rooster. Then the phoenix pointed directly at him with open disdain, silently questioning whether someone like him truly deserved to be called strong. The herald's eyes turned bloodshot as rage surged through him. Unable to bear the humiliation, he let out a furious roar. In the next instant, the rooster-like demon leapt forward suddenly using the explosive frog leap technique. Tearing through space with a powerful demonic strike, he slashed downward with his claws, aiming straight for the phoenix's body. The attack tore open the demon beast's chest, and blood spilled from the wound. Yet even as the injury appeared, the creature launched a swift counterattack. In a flash, he grabbed Levi by the throat and lifted him high into the air as if he weighed nothing. The phoenix remarked calmly that he still possessed the ability to temporarily boost his strength for short periods of time. Meanwhile, the watching spirits of dead demons stared in confusion, unable to fully understand the strange conversation unfolding before them. Even now, the messenger insisted again that he did not consider himself weak, nor did he believe he had betrayed anyone. But the phoenix paid no attention to these words. In his mind, the herald's fate had already been decided. His soul would eventually burn away completely. The messenger could clearly feel the young demon's fear of death hidden beneath his arrogance. Deep inside, he truly did not want to die, yet at that moment he no longer had the strength to resist. Suddenly, a mysterious voice echoed inside the rooster demon's mind, reminding him that he still possessed power. At that exact moment, far away, the powerful demon Theo sat casually on a tree branch drinking wine and sighing in frustration over his inability to find his queen. Without warning, space and time suddenly twisted violently before him, revealing a vision of the fierce battle between the herald and the phoenix. Theo lifted his head, recognized the familiar color of the hair in the vision, and immediately realized that the figure before him was his princess. Without hesitation, Theo smashed the wine bottle on the ground and leapt directly into the crack in space. Almost at the same moment, a spear shot out from the rift in space, flying straight toward both the phoenix and the herald. Theo appeared instantly, pulling the herald toward himself while delivering a powerful kick that forced the phoenix backward. The demon gritted his teeth angrily and was forced to retreat several steps to regain a safe distance. His body slammed violently against the wall with tremendous force. At the same time, Theo's spear pierced through his hand, sending a fountain of blood spraying into the air and forcing a painful cry from the phoenix. When the phoenix saw the weapon clearly, a look of confusion briefly crossed his face. Realizing that the spear had actually injured his body, the phoenix felt both anger and suspicion, wondering whether another powerful traitor demon had appeared. Meanwhile, the herald, held in Theo's arms, continued trembling from pain and exhaustion. Theo noticed that the girl's body was covered in wounds, and judging from her hair color, he realized she was the same woman he had once known long ago. Holding the suffering girl tightly, Theo guessed that she must have taken over Rosalie's body, which explained why her appearance had changed so drastically. Looking at her carefully and then glancing around the battlefield, Theo wondered with excitement how his queen had somehow become a demon after once being human. He also noticed something else astonishing. His princess had already reached the peak of the martial emperor stage. Without hesitation, he handed her a cloak and explained that it was an Earth-rank spiritual treasure. The cloak possessed the ability to block nearly any type of flame and would gradually heal the wearer's injuries over time. Realizing that their enemy was a fire-based demon, Theo became even more delighted, finally confirming that the woman before him was truly his queen. The demon, having found the one he loved again, practically glowed with happiness and did nothing to hide his joy. But his smile quickly faded when he noticed a spear flying toward him, which he immediately intercepted. Straightening his posture, Theo realized that he was now standing in a strange foreign world far from his own territory. As he spun his spear, He sensed the presence of ancient beast blood flowing within his enemy. He calmly declared that he was the ruler of the demonic beings of the Hanga continent, and that the person the phoenix had tried to kill was his queen. But the phoenix reacted with complete indifference, considering both of them nothing more than traitors. In his eyes, they both deserved death for betraying the demon race. Theo's expression darkened. He decided that if the phoenix refused to change his attitude, then their past connection meant nothing. He would kill him. The phoenix responded with a smug grin, clearly not acknowledging him as an equal. Theo pointed his spear, surrounded by icy energy, and demanded to know how he dared provoke him. The next instant, the fire axe and the icy spear collided violently, the sound of metal ringing sharply through the air. Theo attacked with all his strength, but the phoenix refused to yield, meeting every strike and pushing back against each blow. After several exchanges, both warriors seized the moment and launched direct attacks at each other simultaneously. During the rapid clash of blows, Theo's spear nearly pierced straight through the phoenix's neck. At the final second, the demon beast twisted aside to avoid the strike. But Theo immediately rushed forward, using the enemy's axe as a stepping point. Pushing off from it, he launched himself forward again, just as the three-legged golden phoenix unleashed a blazing golden phoenix fire blast. In response to the attack, Theo calmly activated the powerful battle seal technique. At that moment, both fighters unleashed their techniques at the same time. One side erupted with scorching fire that roared like a living storm, while the other released a chilling power filled with deep, bone-piercing frost. Just as the two terrifying attacks were about to collide head-on, something strange happened. The blazing firebird formed by the golden phoenix suddenly began to stiffen, its burning feathers slowly transforming into brittle ice. The frost spread rapidly, crawling across his arms like living crystals. Watching in disbelief, he realized with shock that his powerful true fire had been completely sealed and could no longer respond to his will. Theo calmly explained that his seal possessed the ability to freeze anything it touched. According to him, once the power took hold, even the legendary heavenly flames would struggle to escape its icy grip. He further declared with pride that he represented the purest form of martial power, the living symbol of speed and ferocity, the mighty twilight griffin that ruled the skies with unstoppable strength. The phoenix lowered his gaze toward his sealed hands. The cold kept spreading through his limbs, and the areas trapped in ice gradually became numb, as if the strength in his body was being quietly drained away. In the very next instant, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Something flashed past with terrifying speed, forcing the phoenix to react instantly and sever his own arm with his axe to escape the deadly strike. Theo's spear streaked past like a silver bolt. In that moment, the demon quietly realized that the opponent had already lost control of his elemental advantage. The one-eyed man, whose body was still badly injured, watched the fight with trembling eyes. As he observed the battlefield, he slowly understood that yet another Lord-ranked demon had appeared. He then shifted his gaze toward the unstable herald nearby and noticed how terribly wounded the hero looked, barely holding himself together after the brutal battle. In his heart, the one-eyed man prayed that this mysterious demon could defeat the Golden Phoenix. Otherwise, not only the fighters here, but even the entire Yanhai city would face total destruction. At that very moment, blazing flames surged forward again, rushing directly toward Theo. The Golden Phoenix had launched yet another fierce and relentless fire attack. Without hesitation, the demon released the technique known as Moon Deep Ice, forming a thick barrier that blocked the incoming flames before immediately activating the skill Moonshadow copy. A second Theo appeared beside him, almost identical to the original. The clone moved silently and instantly positioned itself right behind the enemy. From behind, the clone thrust its spear forward while the Golden Phoenix continued unleashing flames, pouring his attention onto what he believed was Theo's real body. However, the blazing wall of fire surrounding the Phoenix was incredibly dense and violent, preventing the spear from piercing through its burning barrier. Seeing this, Theo decided to escalate the battle and summoned his heavenly profound weapon, the legendary Ice Soul Spear. The moment the weapon was released, it spun violently, forming a massive whirlwind around itself. Wrapped in swirling power, It shot forward like a blazing comet aimed directly at the phoenix. Yet instead of weakening, the flames around the phoenix suddenly surged even brighter, burning with an even more intense and frightening brilliance. It quickly became obvious that the phoenix had anticipated this move. A dark, confident smile slowly appeared on his face as his hidden plan began to unfold. Forced to retreat, Theo realized that his strategy had already been seen through. He quickly merged back with his clone while sensing just how overwhelming the enemy's curtain of fire truly was. The phoenix's true fire burned endlessly, erupting in waves without pause, as if the inferno itself refused to ever be extinguished. Theo quietly concluded that his opponent, being another martial saint, must possess an extraordinary amount of primordial energy fueling these relentless flames. Moments later, Theo flipped gracefully through the air, narrowly avoiding the swing of the phoenix's axe, a weapon that had already partially sealed his bloodline earlier. After a long and exhausting exchange of attacks, he landed once again and immediately launched forward with his spear, wondering why the raging flames still refused to fade. The spear blade once again approached the golden phoenix's neck, but just as before, a rising curtain of fire suddenly surged up and blocked the strike. At that point, the demon understood that even the powerful Ice Soul Spear was struggling to break through this overwhelming wall of flames. To make matters worse, the expanding fire forced him to leap sideways, narrowly escaping the scorching heat spreading across the battlefield. At that moment, the one-eyed observer reminded Theo of something important. Certain parts of the phoenix's body, especially the heart and several key areas, seemed strangely different from the rest. Hearing those words, Theo paused briefly in thought. Then, as if a hidden puzzle had suddenly been solved, he realized the truth behind the strange situation. He turned back toward his opponent with a focused expression, preparing his final decisive strike. He knew clearly that he could only activate the seal one last time. Nearby, the herald, barely able to stay conscious, continued watching the fierce battle unfold through half-open eyes. When he forced his eyes open again, he saw Theo's strike knock the phoenix's axe away, sending the weapon spinning violently through the air toward him. The axe landed right at his feet. Now disarmed, the three-legged golden phoenix charged forward in fury, slashing with his claws while releasing explosive waves of fire. Theo only grinned calmly. Everything happening now was exactly what he had planned, and the entire fierce battle before this moment had merely been preparation. Suddenly, Theo's powerful tail wrapped tightly around the phoenix, locking his body in place and completely restricting his movements. Theo then unleashed multiple moon shadow copies while repeatedly activating the seal, leaving the phoenix helpless as attacks continued to rain down on him. Refusing to surrender, the phoenix desperately activated his defensive technique, the burning protection of true purgatory flames. However, the demon instantly responded with overwhelming ice power, suppressing the phoenix's desperate resistance. The thick frost shield formed by Theo proved far stronger than the phoenix's fiery assault. As the defensive barrier gradually faded away, the once raging flames noticeably weakened. Taking advantage of the moment, Theo smiled with confidence and continued attacking relentlessly without giving his enemy any chance to recover. Watching from the side, the herald stared in shock, slowly realizing that the demon fighting the phoenix was actually an allied demonic beast. Even so, he struggled to recall exactly who this mysterious figure was. No matter how hard he tried to search his memory, the name refused to appear. Yet deep inside, he felt a strange sense that they had already crossed paths before. Meanwhile, the phoenix had finally been forced completely onto the defensive. Bound tightly by Theo's icy power, he could only rely on desperate counterattacks. Theo himself understood that activating the sealing technique twice placed an enormous strain on his body. At the same time, the one-eyed man slowly removed the bandage covering his eye and revealed a pale white pupil as he stared toward the battlefield. His strange vision pierced through the enemy's body, allowing him to see a glowing heart radiating white light. He immediately noticed that the phoenix's heart had already been completely frozen by Theo. At that exact moment, the phoenix suddenly felt a sharp, unbearable pain in his chest and realized that the very source of his power had been struck. His entire body trembled violently as Theo coldly observed that the freezing process had occurred in an instant. Clutching his chest in agony, the phoenix desperately begged for his heart to be returned. Unable to endure the terrifying cold spreading through his body, Theo narrowed his eyes and carefully examined his opponent, quietly wondering whether that heart truly belonged to the phoenix at all. If the heart had truly been his, then at the moment of pain the blood throughout the entire body would naturally respond, circulating power freely between the heart and every vein. Under those conditions, the frozen heart would slowly expand its freezing effect until the entire body became completely encased in ice. But the current situation was different. The heart continued supplying power to the body, yet the body itself returned no energy back to the heart. It became clear that the true owner of this heart was far stronger than the one currently using it. The phoenix had merely been exploiting it as a borrowed source of strength. Because of that imbalance, the freezing spread uncontrollably through his body. Filled with fury and hatred, the demon cursed the traitors with his final breath. Soon after, the phoenix's entire body was sealed in solid ice, and his life ended right there on the battlefield. Watching everything unfold, the one-eyed man finally breathed out in relief, quietly noting that the overwhelming pressure of the fire element had completely vanished. At the same time, in another district of the city, a cart that had been burning fiercely for so long suddenly began to lose its strength. The roaring flames slowly shrank, the crackling sounds faded, and before long nothing remained except drifting smoke and a pile of dark ashes. When the nearby citizens realized that the fire had finally gone out, cheers instantly erupted in the streets. People shouted with excitement and relief, celebrating what they believed was their hard-earned victory over the terrifying creature. Their joy grew even stronger as word spread that their leader had successfully defeated the enemy. The people proudly believed that a being of ruler rank had prevailed and protected them from destruction. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Theo stepped forward calmly and thrust his spear deep into the frozen body of his defeated opponent. After a brief moment, he reached inside and pulled out the enemy's heart. The strange object glowed faintly and looked so extraordinary that it resembled an incredibly precious treasure. Without wasting any time, Theo turned around and quickly headed toward the herald, clearly intending to offer the heart as a gift to his queen. Just at that moment, Levi and Jasper suddenly appeared nearby, teleporting onto the battlefield with a flash of light. The instant Jasper saw the frozen heart in Theo's hand, his entire body stiffened. His eyes widened with shock as recognition struck him. With a trembling hand, he pointed directly at the heart, realizing with disbelief that the object Theo was holding was actually his own heart. At that moment, the ice surrounding the heart began to crack slowly. Theo watched in confusion as his deep ice technique suddenly started melting, and the heart itself seemed to awaken like a living thing. In the next instant, the heart violently jerked free, tearing itself out of Theo's grip and flying back through the air at incredible speed toward Jasper's chest. Theo stared in disbelief as the gift he had prepared vanished before his eyes. Anger quickly replaced his shock, and he immediately rushed toward Levi and Jasper. However, by the time he reached them, the heart had already fully returned to Jasper's body. Jasper touched his chest repeatedly, confirming that it had truly been restored. Theo immediately retaliated, launching the cold claw technique toward them. But Levi reacted instantly, recognizing the attack and blocking it effortlessly with his bare hands. The moment their powers clashed, Theo's body stiffened as he felt a familiar and overwhelming pressure pressing down on him. Levi then gathered his strength and, with a powerful motion, hurled Theo away. The demon slammed violently into a wall and slid down until he landed beside the wounded herald. Frowning with irritation, Theo realized that Levi's strength was far greater than he had expected. Turning toward the herald, he immediately began complaining about the situation. Pretending to be helpless, he sighed dramatically and claimed that he no longer had the strength to continue fighting and could only stay here and die together with her. About 10 minutes earlier, Levi had heard cases urgently warn him that if he didn't hurry to help, his old man's fate might be sealed. Levi admitted that he didn't fully understand the situation yet, but he decided that the first step was to deal with the warriors standing in his way. However, at that moment, Casa suddenly stopped him and shouted angrily, calling him crazy for thinking about fighting instead of rescuing his own father. Before their argument could continue, a familiar voice suddenly interrupted them from nearby. It was Jasper, who had just teleported back. Looking at the tense scene around him, he immediately asked what exactly was going on. Levi brightened the moment he saw him. Walking up quickly, he explained that they had been trapped earlier, which was why he wanted to deal with the offender as quickly as possible. Hearing this explanation, Leon and Cassis finally let out long breaths of relief, realizing how close they had come to dying. Not long after, the Supreme Commander arrived at the scene, accompanied by the remaining members of the trial. As soon as he appeared, the Supreme Commander seemed to notice something unusual that others had overlooked. Without hesitation, he immediately issued a firm order to capture Cases. Reacting instantly, Geo unleashed Deus Chain, sending the powerful weapon shooting directly toward the target. However, Lion quickly stepped forward to block the attack with his weapon. Seeing this, Cassius panicked and tried to stop him, warning that resisting would only make things worse. Although Lion managed to knock the chain aside with a powerful strike, it immediately curved back through the air and rushed toward him once again. He quickly raised his guard and tried to defend himself, but even with all his effort, he couldn't fully stop the attack. The other end of the chain shot straight toward his heart. In that instant, Geo activated Heart Unlock, and the chain wrapped tightly around Leon's heart. Overwhelmed by sudden pain, Leon dropped to his knees, gasping desperately for breath. Horror filled his face as he realized he had been completely restrained, and a terrible ache spread through his chest. Seeing his suffering, Cases urged him to calm down and stop resisting the power of the chain. However, Leon stubbornly insisted that Cases should leave immediately while he still could. He explained that he could keep the illusion active long enough to give him a chance to escape. Cases hesitated for a moment, but Lion continued persuading him, saying it was better for one person to survive than for both of them to die together. In the end, Cassis finally admitted that Lion was right, quietly remarking that if their positions were reversed, he probably would have run away already. Meanwhile, the Supreme Commander stood tall and gave a strict order that Cases must be captured at any cost. Berkeley immediately rushed forward, unleashing the powerful heaven-destroying palm toward the fleeing target. But Cases quickly reacted and countered the attack by activating his technique known as Mirror Move. However, it was obvious that he was nearing his physical limit, as his entire body shook violently from exhaustion. The reflected attack appeared inside the mirror portal, and the same heaven-destroying palm burst out behind the warrior. Even so, Berkeley managed to dodge in time, and the devastating blow instead struck the ground and split it apart. Soon after, Joe's seal caught up with them. The chain pierced through Cassius's body, and he trembled violently. As a result, both traitors were completely restrained and unable to move. Lion forced a bitter smile, admitting that there was no longer any reason to maintain the illusion since escape was clearly impossible now. Cases remained silent for a long moment, and Leon sighed heavily, confessing that he had once believed there was still hope after escaping. But now it was painfully clear that even that hope had disappeared. Doubts filled his mind as he wondered whether people could truly have a future under such a leader. Just then, Geo approached them and coldly announced that the gate of Cases's heart had already been sealed, making escape impossible. He added that although they normally avoided using such harsh measures, the actions these men had taken were clear proof of their guilt. Geo warned them calmly that further resistance was pointless and that they should obey the Supreme Commander's orders. Otherwise, if greed, hatred, deceit, or any malicious intent appeared in their hearts, the seal itself would automatically deliver punishment. Hearing this, Lion's expression suddenly changed, and he immediately wondered whether the elder's words were truly accurate. At that moment, the Supreme Commander walked toward Levi and Jasper and informed them that the Capital Center had just received an urgent alarm signal. He explained that more than one Lord-rank demon had appeared in Yanhai and ordered them to hurry and rescue the civilians. Jasper quickly asked the protagonist if that meant the director and the chicken might also be in danger. Levi felt the same possibility was very likely, so without any hesitation he decided they should immediately return to the city. The woman standing beside him looked confused and worried, Because with the power of two overlord-ranked enemies involved, even a warrior as strong as Levi could be facing a very dangerous situation. However, the hero answered firmly and without hesitation. His tone made it clear that he had already made up his mind and would not accept any objections or refusals from anyone. Immediately after saying this, he and Jasper vanished from sight in an instant, teleporting away without wasting even a second. The people who remained behind exchanged puzzled looks. The woman quietly observed that Levi had not looked frightened at all and assumed that his confidence must come from his overwhelming abilities. Jeremy then suddenly remembered something important. Not long ago, the international instruments used to measure combat power had completely failed to determine Levi's true level. According to the report, the strength index kept climbing higher and higher until it finally reached rank 13, where it was officially classified as the terrifying overlord level. Thinking about it carefully, the man began to wonder whether Levi's actual combat power might even surpass rank 13, far beyond what those instruments could measure. Meanwhile, Theo continued sighing dramatically while speaking to his beloved with exaggerated sorrow, complaining that fate had not even given them enough time to properly express their feelings. Listening to this strange speech, the messenger grew increasingly annoyed and wondered silently what kind of reunion or beloved this ridiculous demon beast was even talking about. At that exact moment, Theo accidentally exhaled, and his warm breath brushed right beside the messenger's ear, causing the poor person to blush instantly in pure embarrassment. Trying desperately to pull away, the messenger cursed the twisted demonic beast in his mind, feeling as if he was reaching the limit of what he could tolerate. Noticing the chicken's miserable condition, Jasper looked worried and commented that it seemed badly injured. He kindly offered to treat it using his acupuncture skills. The messenger immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. He quickly waved both hands in panic and insisted with a trembling voice that he was absolutely not injured at all. Jasper then turned to Levi with a slightly resentful expression and asked whether the chicken really didn't want him to perform acupuncture treatment. Levi remained completely calm and casually encouraged him, saying that the chicken actually wanted the treatment. Hearing that, Jasper's determination instantly returned, and he decided he would definitely proceed. As Jasper slowly approached, the messenger felt as if death itself was closing in. Trembling with terror, he desperately begged him not to come any closer. At that critical moment, Theo suddenly stepped forward and positioned himself directly in front of the messenger. With a serious voice, he firmly declared that no one would be allowed to harm his beloved while he was standing there. Right after that declaration, he used a technique that instantly created a thick wall of ice, completely blocking the path in front of them. The messenger looked at Theo with unexpected gratitude and admitted quietly that, despite all his strange behavior, he was not entirely unbearable after all. Jasper happily explained that they only wanted to heal the chicken and proudly added that he happened to be an excellent and highly skilled acupuncturist. Hearing this explanation, Theo looked confused and asked suspiciously if they were truly talking about his beloved. He then turned his head toward the trembling girl, who was shaking her head frantically in clear panic. Seeing her reaction, Theo immediately raised his hand protectively and stated firmly that since his beloved refused, no one should dare come any closer. Jasper looked toward Levi with tears already forming in his eyes and said sadly that the chicken clearly did not want to receive his treatment. But Levi calmly reassured him again that she actually did want it. At that moment, Levi suddenly stepped forward toward Theo, catching the demon completely off guard. Before Theo could even react, Levi grabbed him and slammed his head straight down onto the ground. After restraining him, Levi casually told Jasper that it was now safe for him to begin the treatment. Jasper immediately brightened with excitement and rushed enthusiastically toward the herald. The poor herald screamed in absolute horror, crying out desperately for help while pitifully begging to be saved from those terrifying needles. Theo tried to struggle free so he could rush over and help, but Levi held him firmly in place and left him completely powerless. Without hesitation, Jasper plunged a needle straight into the herald's head, and Theo flinched the moment he witnessed such a shocking scene. However, Levi immediately smacked Theo on the head with his fist, leaving a large bump swelling up instantly on his forehead. The herald cried out in pain and desperately called for help from his companion, but by that time his head was already covered with countless acupuncture needles. When the herald suddenly went limp, Jasper nervously asked Levi whether the chicken had died. Levi examined it calmly and replied that it was still alive. At that moment, the messenger's hand accidentally touched Theo's hand. Jasper noticed this detail and remarked with surprise that their relationship seemed unusually close. Levi explained that Theo had been calling the chicken his beloved, comparing it to the image of a devoted wife from a movie they had watched earlier. Jasper suddenly understood what was going on and stared in shock, wondering if their chicken had somehow actually found itself a rooster. He nearly burst into tears while complaining that none of them even had wives yet, but somehow their chicken had already become someone's wife. Seeing his friend's emotional state, Levi gently patted his head and tried to calm him down. After that, the protagonist turned his attention toward the frozen phoenix nearby. He pointed it out to Jasper and casually remarked that the demon actually looked surprisingly cute. Jasper turned around to look and instantly felt a strange sympathy, silently agreeing that the creature did indeed appear oddly charming. The surrounding demon spirits didn't quite know how to react, as it seemed the group had somehow gained yet another unexpected friend. Meanwhile, the rich and mouth-watering aroma of fried phoenix meat spread through the air. The one-eyed man caught the scent as well and quickly realized just how unbelievably tempting the smell was. Jasper excitedly asked if the food would be ready soon. The protagonist glanced at the cauldron and replied that there was only a little time left before it was finished. Meanwhile, the unconscious Theo suddenly caught the delicious scent drifting through the air. His nose twitched slightly, and a moment later he slowly regained consciousness. Sitting up in confusion, he immediately noticed the messenger lying in front of him, unconscious and covered in blood. Startled and frightened, Theo trembled and quickly checked whether the messenger was still breathing. A moment later he finally relaxed, realizing with relief that his beloved was still alive. After some time, he carefully wiped the blood from the body. Jasper noticed this and casually waved his hand, inviting the rooster to come over and drink a bowl of soup. Theo instantly turned around with an offended expression and angrily protested that he was not some ordinary rooster, but a noble spiritual beast, the very incarnation of the Demon King. However, after saying that, he suddenly became confused by what he had heard earlier and began to suspect that when they said chicken, they were actually referring to his beloved. Looking back at the messenger, Theo realized with surprise that his beloved's beast form really did resemble a chicken, and strangely enough, he even found it adorable. Little by little, Theo finally realized that whenever they mentioned a rooster, they were actually referring to him. After thinking about it for a moment, he boldly confirmed that if that was the case, then he truly was the rooster, leaving the surrounding demon spirits completely stunned. Jasper then calmly explained that the herald's internal organs had previously been burned, but thanks to the acupuncture needles, they had now been completely healed. Hearing this, Theo finally relaxed, sensing that his beloved's aura had indeed become much stronger and more stable. Afterward, he curiously asked what exactly they were cooking in the cauldron, because the delicious smell drifting through the air was simply impossible to ignore. Jasper cheerfully announced that the frozen turkey he had discovered nearby turned out to be surprisingly cute. The way he said it made it sound less like food and more like some amusing little creature he had stumbled across. After saying that, he handed a bowl toward the demon. At first, Theo tried to keep up a noble appearance, arguing proudly that beings like him and the phoenix belonged to the same ancient lineage, and therefore eating such a creature felt inappropriate. But almost immediately afterward, his attitude changed completely. He suddenly demanded a much larger bowl, pulled out an enormous container, and eagerly began filling it before digging in without hesitation. Everyone around watched this scene with wide eyes. They had never imagined that even a powerful Lord-ranked demon would casually eat a creature of its own kind, apparently without the slightest hesitation. Theo explained quite seriously that ancient rare beasts were extremely valuable ingredients and considered delicacies among powerful cultivators. However, because of conflicting elemental forces, he insisted he should not eat too much of it. Levi quickly noticed something strange about that explanation. While Theo was claiming moderation, A growing mountain of empty bowls had already piled up right in front of him. Jasper simply sighed helplessly at the sight and reminded him that they still needed to leave at least one bowl for the chicken. Hearing that, Theo felt strangely pleased. In his mind, these people were clearly treating his beloved very kindly. Without hesitation, he immediately pulled out another enormous bowl, which caused Levi and Jasper to freeze in place in disbelief. However, after receiving another sharp smack from the protagonist, he reluctantly switched it for a smaller bowl instead. But when Jasper finally stepped forward to serve himself, they discovered that the cauldron had already been completely emptied. The boys searched around with disappointed expressions, hoping there might still be some food left somewhere, but the pot was truly empty. Levi clicked his tongue in irritation and jokingly muttered that perhaps it would have been easier if they had simply cooked the rooster instead. Jasper stared sadly at the empty cauldron. Then suddenly he paused, sensing something strange, and quickly called out to Levi. When Levi turned around, he saw Jasper extending his bowl toward him, explaining warmly that best friends should always share their food. Levi smiled slightly at this gesture and accepted the bowl with sincere gratitude. However, he only drank half of the soup before stopping, deciding that his friend deserved to have an equal portion as well. Jasper's face lit up instantly with happiness. Meanwhile, Theo suddenly felt a strange chill run through his body, as if he had briefly sensed an ominous premonition, but he quickly dismissed it as imagination. Some time later, the messenger finally woke up as well. By then, Theo was already sitting nearby holding a large bowl, clearly waiting patiently. He repeatedly called out to his beloved in a gentle voice, offering the fragrant golden phoenix soup. The messenger felt deeply annoyed by this behavior. Inwardly, he fumed that they kept calling him husband, while this strange and overly affectionate demon still lingered nearby. However, when he looked down at the bowl, he realized the soup was made from phoenix meat. If he drank it, he might actually be able to break through and reach the sovereign level himself. Staring at the delicious and fragrant dish with growing excitement, he decided that once he achieved a breakthrough, he would no longer have to fear this ice demon. And when that happened, he would finally be strong enough to get rid of this extremely annoying pervert once and for all. Theo quietly watched as the messenger greedily devoured the soup. Letting out a deep sigh, he thought that his beloved looked surprisingly obedient and even a little adorable. But the messenger soon noticed the intense gaze fixed on him. Feeling uncomfortable, he turned his head sharply and demanded that they stop staring at him. Jasper calmly explained that he and the hero treated the chicken kindly because it was their good friend. That also meant they had no intention of harming the rooster. He even raised his hand firmly and warned that if anyone dared bully the chicken, both he and Levi would eliminate that person without hesitation. Listening to this exchange, Theo couldn't help but feel shocked. In his mind, the cultivation level of these two humans might actually exceed even the realm of the gods. Suddenly, he stood up and declared proudly that he had spent 5 long years searching for his beloved, and now that he had finally found them, he would do everything possible to protect and care for them. These emotional words moved Jasper so deeply that tears filled his eyes, while Levi quickly tried to calm him down. Meanwhile, the messenger's face darkened as he bit his nails, realizing the conversation was clearly about him, yet he still didn't fully understand why. Theo then turned toward him and sincerely explained that his beloved was fortunate to have 2 loyal friends who truly cared about him, something that deeply moved him as a husband. The messenger immediately recoiled in panic, wondering where these so-called good friends had appeared from when all they seemed to do was embarrass and tease him. Meanwhile, Jasper turned curiously toward Levi and asked whether the hen would be able to produce chicks in the future now that she had a rooster. Hearing that ridiculous idea, the messenger exploded in anger and shouted that he was not a chicken at all. He was clearly a rooster. Jasper suddenly looked alarmed and realized that if that were true, they would no longer be able to eat eggs because that would mean eating their friends' children. Levi sadly asked if that really meant they could never eat eggs again, and Jasper reluctantly confirmed that it was probably true. The two of them continued discussing the situation with surprising seriousness, eventually concluding that eggs would no longer appear unless the rooster died. Hearing this terrifying conclusion, the messenger quickly changed his strategy. He forced a friendly smile, called Theo a strange pervert, and awkwardly patted him on the head. Pretending to soften his attitude, he then asked calmly why Theo had suddenly appeared earlier and helped him during the fight. When he heard the question, Theo became shy and embarrassed again, eventually explaining that the queen herself had called him. This statement completely stunned the herald, who began wondering if some strange spiritual connection had appeared after traveling between worlds. However, he couldn't remember ever thinking about this creature before. But as he listened carefully to Theo's story, memories from another world suddenly resurfaced in his mind. Trying hard to control his irritation, he realized that the person standing before him was the same stubborn madman who had once refused to let go of the past. With cold sweat forming on his forehead, the herald realized something horrifying. This demon had mistaken him for Rosalie and had chased him all the way into this world. Still, he had to admit that this foolish beast had turned out to be surprisingly loyal and devoted. However, the messenger bitterly reminded himself that he was not Rosalie at all, and more importantly, he wasn't even a woman. He cautiously stepped closer to the captivated demon, but noticing Levi and Jasper watching them closely, he became nervous that the truth might be discovered. So he quickly pulled Theo aside with a mysterious expression and declared that this conversation should be held privately, far away from curious listeners. Placing a hand firmly on Theo's shoulder, he loudly announced that he was definitely not the queen Theo had been searching for. He even began acting dramatically, claiming that the real story behind everything was incredibly tragic. The messenger then spun an emotional tale, explaining that Levi and Jasper had once been close friends of his sister. Later, according to his story, she had died. Devastated by grief, they gathered her soul and sent it to another world to cultivate a new spiritual body. In that distant world, the soul had supposedly entered the body of a human woman named Rosalie. With tears forming in his eyes and a sorrowful expression, he declared that this woman was actually the queen Theo had been searching for all along. After hearing the story, Theo looked completely confused and slowly clarified that if that were true, then the queen must actually be the herald's sister rather than the herald himself. The messenger quickly nodded in agreement to support his own story. However, Theo still asked suspiciously how he knew that his sister had died. The messenger explained that her physical body had perished, but her soul survived, cultivated itself in another world, and eventually returned to tell him everything. Hearing this explanation, Theo suddenly leaned forward and asked eagerly what exactly she had told him. As Theo stepped closer, the messenger instinctively stepped back. But the demon moved closer again, shrinking the distance between them until the messenger began stuttering nervously. In a moment of growing desperation, an idea suddenly struck him. He hurriedly cried out that she had already told him everything while inside the egg. Saying this, he quickly reached into his belongings and pulled out the mysterious egg. The moment Theo heard those words, he completely believed them. His eyes widened so much they almost popped out of their sockets, and he stared at the egg in shock, convinced that his long-lost queen must truly be inside it. The messenger avoided meeting Theo's eyes directly, but still nodded in confirmation. He added awkwardly that after speaking with him, her soul had grown weak again. He explained that she had fallen back into a deep sleep. Theo's expression instantly froze like stone as he slowly reached out toward the egg, causing the messenger to break into a cold sweat. Suddenly, Theo grabbed the messenger's hand and looked at him with moist, affectionate eyes. In a trembling voice, he wondered if they were lying to him or if his queen had already fallen out of love with him. The messenger was completely thrown off by this emotional display, but Theo kept going, sadly complaining that she was abandoning him right after he had finally confessed his feelings. Feeling both physically uncomfortable and mentally exhausted, the messenger muttered something unclear under his breath. Finally, he lost his patience completely. In frustration, he grabbed Theo sharply by the ear and shouted angrily that he was not the queen Theo had been searching for and never could be. The messenger exploded with irritation and declared loudly that the reason was obvious. He was a man, a rooster, not a hen or a queen. To prove his point, he angrily tore open his outer clothing, revealing his muscular chest and clearly masculine body. Theo leaned forward to look more closely at him and suddenly froze in place. For several seconds, the two simply stood there in silence as the wind passed between them. Then, without warning, a single sparkling tear slowly rolled down Theo's cheek. Seeing this heartbreaking reaction, the messenger quickly tried to call out to him. But Theo had already frozen completely in grief, leaving the messenger exhausted as he collapsed onto the ground. In a panic, the messenger grabbed a hammer and began tapping desperately on the layer of ice surrounding Theo, begging him to wake up and listen carefully. He repeated over and over that he was a rooster, not a queen, and pointed urgently toward the nearly hatched egg, explaining that the real queen was inside it. He continued explaining that once the egg hatched, perhaps she would agree to become queen again. If that happened, Theo would finally be able to reunite with her. Under the pressure of these words, the thick ice slowly began to melt. The messenger kept reassuring him that the one inside the egg might truly be the queen he had been searching for all these years. With heavy emotions weighing on him, Theo finally accepted the egg from the messenger's hands. As the ice melted completely, he gently held the egg and softly asked if she had really told him all those things. The messenger nodded hesitantly and added that after all, she was his sister. Theo then anxiously asked when the egg would finally hatch. This unexpected question caught the messenger completely off guard. He awkwardly replied that he honestly didn't know because he had absolutely no idea how eggs were supposed to hatch. Theo's eyes suddenly lit up with excitement, and he enthusiastically suggested that he could try hatching the egg himself. Hearing this, the messenger's face immediately turned pale with horror. But Theo spoke with bright determination, declaring that he was willing to learn how to do it properly. The messenger thought to himself that this naive and overly devoted man cared so deeply about his queen that he might actually succeed in hatching the egg. He decided that once Rosalie was born from the egg, she would probably have no memory of the past, and certainly would not mistake him for a rooster again. With a solemn expression, he finally declared that since things had turned out this way, he would reluctantly entrust his sister to Theo. However, he reminded him again that he himself was only a rooster and could never be the queen. Theo immediately addressed him respectfully as brother-in-law, but also mentioned that Levi and Jasper constantly referred to him as a chicken. Surprisingly, the messenger didn't explode in anger this time. Not knowing how to explain everything clearly, he simply sighed and said that it was a very complicated and rather sad story. He then explained that Levi and Jasper had once fallen into the void while returning from another world, and when they finally came back, they mistakenly thought he was his sister. Theo asked again to confirm whether he understood correctly, that the hen they mentioned was actually the messenger's sister and not the messenger himself. The messenger impatiently replied that of course he was a rooster. Seeing that his supposed brother-in-law looked tired, Theo kindly offered to explain everything to Levi and Jasper himself, and even check whether his medicine could heal them. However, the messenger quickly stopped him, explaining that they would never be able to accept the truth that she had died. So in order not to hurt them, he had continued pretending to be his sister. Hearing this, Theo looked deeply moved and enthusiastically thanked him, calling him an amazing and considerate person. The messenger shrugged slightly and replied that since things had already reached this point, he might as well continue playing along with the situation. Theo's expression softened noticeably. His eyes shone with emotion as he listened to the request not to reveal such a painful truth to Levi and Jasper. The messenger patted Theo on the shoulder and suggested that he should keep pretending to be the rooster while he himself would continue acting as his sister. Theo was so shocked by this proposal that his cheeks flushed red, and he immediately tried to protest. But the rooster calmly assured him that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. In the end, despite his embarrassment, Theo reluctantly agreed to go along with the strange plan. Afterward, the messenger turned away and rubbed his forehead tiredly, secretly feeling satisfied that this clever trick might finally help him escape the troublesome demon. Now he believed he would no longer be forced to lay eggs for those two ridiculous troublemakers, and he quietly congratulated himself for being incredibly clever. Meanwhile, Theo carefully examined the egg in his hands. But in the very next moment, his body began slowly fading away. The herald reacted rather calmly to this strange sight and even sighed with relief, realizing that Theo's appearance had only been a temporary summoning. Soon after, Jasper suddenly appeared out of nowhere and loudly asked where the chicken's rooster had disappeared to. Hearing this, The messenger quickly changed his expression and casually explained that the rooster had returned home temporarily to hatch the egg. He then added proudly that their relationship was extremely good and that the rooster would return immediately whenever he called. Levi looked a little disappointed and muttered sadly that he had really hoped they could eat some eggs. The messenger forced a polite smile and replied that unfortunately it wasn't possible yet. At that exact moment, a sharp pain suddenly shot through the messenger's chest. A strange sense of guilt washed over him, and he wondered whether it might be connected to the lie he had just told that demon king. The uneasy feeling quickly grew stronger until his conscience began to ache painfully. He collapsed to the ground, causing Jasper and Levi to rush over in alarm. After quickly examining the situation, Jasper concluded that the phoenix meat and soup he had eaten earlier were probably responsible, and his body was now undergoing a powerful transformation. Levi looked down carefully and realized that the person lying in front of him was clearly no longer just a simple chicken. Soon fiery wings burst open from the body, surrounded by blazing flames. Jasper stared in shock and wondered nervously if their friend had somehow turned into fried chicken. However, in the next moment, a magnificent flaming phoenix emerged and soared into the sky. Sparks scattered everywhere, and the heat became almost unbearable. At the same time, a notification appeared on the system screen announcing that a powerful energy body had been detected that could reduce thirst for 10 whole years. Thus, the Herald officially completed his evolution, becoming a terrifying Lord-rank demon, a sinister fire-devouring phoenix. The surrounding demon souls were filled with fear as they realized he had already reached the ruler level, and many of them doubted whether they could possibly defeat him. Only the polar kitsune's soul remained calm. She had predicted this outcome long ago when he had first reached national rank. Afterward, the silent gazes of the demon souls slowly turned toward the side where another phoenix stood casually picking its nose. One of the demons quietly reminded the others that they also had a being of master rank standing among them. But the kitsune calmly replied that rank alone meant very little. After all, he had also ascended, and in this world the only rule that truly mattered was the strength of the strong. Meanwhile, the messenger was in the final stage of completing his long-awaited promotion, his entire body trembling slightly as waves of unfamiliar power slowly gathered around him. As the transformation settled, a vast and majestic figure gradually formed behind him. It looked like a colossal bird made of blazing energy, its wings stretching wide like a mythical creature descending from ancient legends. With a sudden surge of confidence, he stretched out his razor-sharp claws and lifted his head proudly, finally claiming his new identity as a true fire-devouring Phoenix Lord. Every warrior present stared in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the magnificent creature. They couldn't help but admire its overwhelming beauty and the awe-inspiring grandeur radiating from it. Even though Lexi remained unconscious, the shock still lingered within him. After landing, he felt an incredible strength flooding through his body, and the sheer scale of the change left even him deeply astonished. He looked down at himself again and again, hardly able to believe it. Somehow, he had truly stepped into the rank of a ruler, and even his appearance had undergone a dramatic transformation. Gripping the bracelets on his wrists, he suddenly realized something unbelievable. He was no longer just a simple chicken, and the way he looked had changed beyond recognition. For a moment, mixed emotions rushed through him. Feeling strangely sentimental, he even muttered an apology to his ancestors and to the roosters and hens who had once raised him. But in the very next second, all that solemn dignity vanished. Holding a fan in his hand, he bounced around excitedly, proudly admiring the fact that he had finally turned into a phoenix. Then his expression suddenly turned serious. With great determination, he declared that from now on anyone who dared to call him a chicken would get beaten so badly they would forget the word forever. However, the moment he finished saying this, Jasper casually remarked that the chicken actually seemed to have become even more beautiful. The phoenix immediately erupted in fury. Letting out an angry roar, he demanded loudly to know who still had the nerve to call him a chicken. Jasper simply stared at him in confusion, while Levi, sensing the situation might escalate, quickly stepped forward and forced the herald to shut his mouth. In the very next moment, the phoenix suddenly changed his expression. Folding his hands into a heart shape, he smiled brightly and said he truly appreciated the compliment. Jasper's face instantly lit up. Giving a cheerful thumbs up, he happily repeated that the chicken really was becoming more and more beautiful. Deep down inside, the messenger could only sigh quietly. No matter how powerful he became or what rank he reached, these people would probably always see him as nothing more than a chicken. At last, he let out a heavy, defeated sigh, pressed his forehead against the wall, and fell into a silent sulk filled with quiet resentment. Nearby, One Eye leaned against the wall as well, silently wondering whether these two slightly unhinged guys were simply too strong for anyone to deal with. He began mentally calculating their combat rankings and suddenly remembered that the Herald also had allies of equal strength who could appear to support him. On top of that, after the trial broadcast from headquarters had aired, Levi's true combat ability had been revealed to the entire world. Thinking about all this made One Eye rub his head in frustration, secretly wondering what the top fighters from other countries would think about this situation. Meanwhile, Jasper yawned so widely that tears formed in the corners of his eyes. Seeing this, the main character casually suggested that they should head back and get some rest. His partner quietly agreed. Together they walked over to One Eye and politely explained that Jasper wasn't feeling well, so they planned to leave early. Right after that, the messenger instantly shrank back into the form of a chicken and hopped straight into Levi's waiting arms. One Eye watched them leave and couldn't help thinking how remarkable it was that even after reaching the powerful rank of a ruler, the messenger still obediently followed Levi. Feeling strangely inspired, One Eye thumped his chest proudly and silently began calling Levi his comrade. By the time night arrived, the two young men were already fast asleep, each resting quietly in their own separate beds. However, Jasper soon began to feel unwell again, and before he realized it, his mind slipped back into another terrifying nightmare. In the dream, he saw a white-haired man holding a dagger dripping with fresh blood. In a cold voice, the man said the blade was forged from stardust and demanded to know whether the other person was secretly working with the enemy. The stranger answered with a gloomy expression, saying that even without cooperation, the protective barrier wouldn't hold much longer. The enemy was simply too powerful to defeat right now. Hearing this, the white-haired man's face darkened instantly as he concluded with bitter certainty that the stranger had betrayed him. Those harsh words clearly struck the stranger somewhere deep inside, causing his expression to stiffen for a moment. After a brief silence, he suddenly broke down and shouted that all the gods were growing weaker, including the man standing before him. He went on desperately, explaining that more and more gods were dying in brutal battles and that the power of the divine was fading with each passing day. Then, wearing a cold and cynical smile, the stranger declared that surrender was the only possible path forward, because stubborn resistance would only lead to certain death. At that moment, the white-haired man's expression hardened, and he quietly decided that this person was no longer worthy of becoming his successor. His eyes turned bloodshot with rage as he angrily accused the stranger of being nothing more than a worthless and pathetic creature. As Jasper moved to attack within the dream, the stranger quickly stepped back and calmly said there was no point wasting anger on him anymore. He explained with chilling indifference that his only mission was to destroy the defensive barrier using the dagger. The moment he finished speaking, four additional figures suddenly appeared nearby, emerging from the darkness. They stared at Jasper with dangerous, taunting expressions, while the stranger mockingly suggested that Jasper was afraid of the so-called millennials. Jasper instantly grew alert, but before he could react, lightning crashed down from the sky, and someone rushed up behind him, stabbing a knife deep into his back. At the same time, a distant robot fired an attack that pierced straight through his chest, and almost immediately another enemy struck him from behind. Finally, a woman stepped forward and slammed a devastating palm strike directly into his body with overwhelming force. All of these attacks landed at nearly the same moment, completely overwhelming him and crushing any chance of resistance. He collapsed to the ground, and in the next instant his body seemed to fall endlessly into a dark void as blood scattered through the air. Back in reality, Jasper's face had turned pale. His entire body was soaked with sweat as he shook his head violently and let out frightened groans. At that moment, A gentle hand reached out and lightly tapped his cheek several times in an attempt to wake him. Levi, who had been sitting beside the bed the whole time, called Jasper's name with concern until Jasper slowly opened his eyes and finally escaped the nightmare. Jasper burst into tears and explained that he had dreamed again about those terrible people who brought even worse companions with them and beat him to death. Hearing this made Levi instantly furious, and he firmly declared that if those enemies appeared again, he would personally deal with them himself. The boy stared at him for a moment in confusion, then quietly wiped away his tears and nodded with a small, relieved smile. Meanwhile, the sky above the academic building's top floor slowly began to brighten as dawn approached. One Eye and Tracy were already there, waiting patiently for the helicopter to arrive. When the visitors finally appeared, they greeted them with respectful expressions, and Supreme Commander Tracy politely invited them to proceed inside. Once inside the conference room, he announced that the words cases had spoken during the broadcast had triggered the most serious crisis the department had ever faced. He emphasized gravely that if the aftermath of that conversation wasn't properly handled, the consequences would be devastating not only for the department, but possibly for the entire nation. At this point, One Eye cautiously asked whether what cases had said about the forbidden experiment was actually true. The commander immediately confirmed that it was indeed true, which was exactly why the situation had become so dangerously serious. He added that if cases had never exposed the truth during the broadcast, headquarters would have continued hiding it until the very end, because such knowledge could easily divide humanity. However, he also pointed out that Levi was an extraordinary talent and an extremely powerful fighter, and despite the chaos, the broadcast might still end up having some unexpected positive effects. The commander calmly confirmed that everything being discussed was indeed true. He went on to explain, in a steady and measured tone, that this very situation was the main reason he had personally traveled all the way to Yanhai. According to him, the matter had grown far too important to handle from afar, so he felt it was necessary to come in person and deal with it directly. After a brief pause, he announced that headquarters had already made a major decision. In exactly 3 days, a brand new nationwide live broadcast would be organized. This broadcast would not be a small internal briefing either. It would be transmitted simultaneously to every special operations unit across the entire country. The commander then clarified that what he was referring to was the upcoming negotiations with cases. These discussions would play a crucial role in determining whether the crisis triggered by cases' shocking statements could still be eased, or whether the situation would spiral even further out of control. He stressed with particular emphasis that outstanding fighters such as Jasper, and especially Levi, would almost certainly become key figures during these negotiations. In his view, their presence and influence might end up shaping the entire direction of the talks. Tracy listened carefully before responding in a calm but serious voice. She said that she fully understood the gravity of the current situation and assured everyone present that she would cooperate completely with the Supreme Commander in whatever way was required. At that moment, One Eye leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand as if deep in thought. He then said that there was something he wanted to ask. Tracy unconsciously mirrored the same gesture, touching her chin while thinking, before adding that she actually had a question of her own as well. They exchanged a quick glance, and almost at the exact same moment, they both spoke. The question that came out of their mouths was identical. How, exactly, were they supposed to deal with those two mentally unstable individuals? After saying it aloud, both of them suddenly fell quiet. A second later they spoke again at the same time, awkwardly admitting that, unsurprisingly, they had both been worrying about the exact same issue the entire time.